Hi everybody, this is Shamini Jain with the Consciousness and Healing Initiative, and I am so excited to be talking with Sarah Pressman, Dr. Sarah Pressman from UC Irvine. Sarah is an associate professor in the Department of Psychology and an expert leading researcher in the areas of positive emotion and health. And Sarah just gave a fabulous talk here at UC San Diego. Thank you so much for
You're
that.
welcome. Happy to be here.
Really wonderful. And I thought we'd just take a few minutes and pick your brain about what we know about positive emotions and health. And what does the data really say? Are positive emotions really, in fact, good for us?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, the field is still relatively young. I think that I started doing this work about 10 years ago, and at that point, there was maybe like a handful of studies on different kinds of health outcomes, but it's really exploded in the last few years. And there's definitely some research areas where we know a lot and some research areas where we know a lot less. And so I think the one area that we're really seeing consistent findings in is happy people living longer. And so there's a ton of studies out there. I'd say by this point, more than 20, maybe even more than 30 studies that have shown consistently that, if you take a population of people and ask them about their positive emotions, how happy they are, how calm and excited, and then follow them for maybe 10, 20, 30 years, that the people who are more positive are living longer. And there's been, these summaries of the literature, meta-analyses that have shown that it's a, pretty consistent effect size. The thing we don't know as much about is why, what exactly is going on. Is it that happy people, take care of themselves better, so they're exercising and sleeping better? There's some data that suggests that's part of it. We definitely know that happy people have better relationships. And so we know that social relationships are a big part of why people live longer. They have people to help them with their stressors and take care of them and make sure that they lead healthy lives and just generally make them feel happier, which again has that nice effect on their health as well. And then, even these like physiological possible benefits, which is that when we feel positive emotions, it has this host of effects that, cascade in our bodies, like improving our immune system function, dropping our blood pressure, improving our heart rate function, our heart rate variability, and dropping stress hormones in a lot of really important ways that can have downstream effects on health. And so those connections are definitely there, but not much research has kind of pulled together all of those pieces together to really understand the whole picture. So, but I think it's very compelling that happy people live longer. Now, the areas we know a lot less about are things that I think people want to see this data, but don't see it as much, which is things like, do happy people, are they more likely to survive if they get a disease? So if I get, stage 4 breast cancer, am I more likely to survive it if I'm happy? If I have AIDS, am I more likely to live a longer life if I'm happy? And there are some studies that suggest that's the case, but it's not completely consistent. There's not a lot of replication across diseases. And the thing that we really don't know yet is there anything that we can do where we manipulate positive emotion and keep someone alive longer? So everyone would really love for us to be able to intervene and make someone happier and then have them live a longer life, with cancer, with heart disease, things like that. And at this point, what we know is that with positive emotion interventions, we can definitely make people feel happier. We can have them self-report that they're more satisfied with their lives, that they're happier, they're more grateful, and those effects can sometimes last for months. But what we haven't seen yet is whether or not that translates into years of extra life or months of extra life.
Of long life. Those studies are, as you know, very hard to do, and it takes a lot of time and money to do that. But I'm reminded by a recent study, and this is just one that we did here at UCSD, where Laura Redwine was really the primary researcher with Paul Mills, and I was a co-investigator on it as well, where we looked at the effects of gratitude journaling in heart failure. And in that study, which was really just a brief intervention where we asked people to, journal and just write down things that they were grateful for every day for a couple of months, really, we found improvements, you could say improvements in heart rate variability.
Oh, excellent.
And also some changes in inflammatory markers. Forgive me, I forget which ones. So that was a very short study, and so obviously to follow those folks over time.
Right. But it's so promising, right? Yeah. And I think there's a lot of reasons to believe it would have long-term benefits. And I mean, I know that there's some work coming out of Northwestern and Judy Moskowitz's lab where they're trying this in a lot of disease populations. They're definitely seeing that with these kinds of things like gratitude journaling and, savoring and those kinds of positive activities, mindfulness, that they definitely improve quality of life. There's no question that like a cancer patient feels better when they're doing this. And we know that self-reporting that you feel better is going to translate to these benefits as well. So there's a lot of, I think, reason to be optimistic that we'll get there. It's just like you're saying, we need the money for the studies that will help us really figure out, does this work? But then also I think, some really nice tailored work to look at like which kinds of interventions are going to work for which diseases and at what time point in the disease do you intervene, right? Like there's so much nuance there, and that we really have to explore that a lot more. Yeah,
and you spoke about that a lot, and I really appreciated what we've been talking about in terms of context. And I understand that you're really interested in looking at this, so it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. Right. We already know that emotions are culturally contextual.
Right.
And so, happiness to me may not even mean the same thing as happiness to you. And, I'd love for us to talk a little bit about that, because I think there are big questions about what do we mean by happiness? Because there's so much that we can say about that, and these ideas of happiness and well-being kind of, get all conflated together.
Definitely.
So we have all of this research that's showing both happiness in terms of what's called positive affect, right? The things that we think about, happy versus sad, those kinds of aspects, versus other things that you touched upon, which fall into, what people often call well-being, which is positive relationships with others, life purpose, environmental mastery, self-esteem. So, and all of these things also relate to health.
Sure.
And as I remember, my reading of the literature, these aspects of what we call eudaimonic well-being have been related as well with longevity.
Right.
So is it the case then that feeling happy, kind of like more often than not on a day-to-day basis, feeling happy versus feeling sad, has an effect on longevity and well-being in terms of positive, relationships with others, life purpose, self-acceptance? Those also have effects on longevity, on basically life, longer life. So obviously these are related, right? So as researchers, how do we kind of parse this out?
Yeah, there was a great talk I went to a few years ago, where someone put a slide up and just had, it was Ken Sheldon, and he had every possible well-being word that was kind of out there, and it was like 1,000 different words that could talk about different well-being constructs. And because of that sort of phenomenon in the field, it's so hard to know what's doing what, because for every life, like you don't replicate life purpose with every possible health outcome and then look at life satisfaction with every possible outcome. And so oftentimes people conflate these different well-being measures as being the same, and they're not. But it's also very rare to have any study that pits them against each other to see, so when does optimism outperform life satisfaction? Does happiness outperform excitement?
And it doesn't even make sense to do that, does it? Because these things obviously relate to each other.
And exactly. And I think that it's kind of a silly rabbit hole to go into, because when you have high life satisfaction, when you have high life purpose, you feel more positive emotions on a day-to-day basis. Yeah. And so that those two things you can't really take them apart. And the way I really think about it recently too is that when I think about how these things are having a downstream effect on your body and having these health effects, probably one of the reasons that life satisfaction, that life purpose have these benefits is because it's making us feel less stressed. It's making us feel more happy. It's having these emotional effects on a day-to-day basis. There's not a life purpose part of our brain that is having like a direct effect on the hypothalamus and altering stress, right? It's having a much more basic, emotional change, right? We know that, basic emotions have these effects on our brain, have these effects on our body, that it's probably kind of, they're working together essentially. There have been studies that have tried to separate these and compete them against each other. So comparing what you called eudaimonia versus hedonic constructs, but oftentimes it's not really a fair fight, right? Because they're saying, okay, I'm going to take these things that are these dispositional, long-lasting traits, like how I feel about my life, how I feel about my relationships, and I'm going to contrast this with how happy I was today, or how happy I was this week. And of course, the trait ones are going to work out, but when you look at trait positive affect, I imagine, not that many studies have done this, that trait positive affect is going to perform in a very similar way to trait purpose, trait esteem. But I think we do need to do some studies where we really try to see, well, maybe in some cases, some of these traits have unique, distinct things that will help in certain circumstances. Like you could imagine, optimism, my expectation that things will work out in the future could be really useful in certain courses of a disease, right? Like if I'm going to try to increase your optimism so that you persist in an intervention to try to improve your heart health, maybe that's going to help because you believe that, trying to change your stress, trying to improve your exercise will help you. But if I'm pessimistic, maybe it won't work, So I think there's times where certain things might help. We know that people who at the end of their life have life purpose live longer. So maybe that's the trait you want to try to mess around with to try to keep people alive longer. So I think there are ways for us really trying to tease apart what matters when, but like I think you were trying to get at, they're all part of the same umbrella to some extent. And, I think that they're both all useful, but then also we need to figure out when certain parts of them are useful.
Yeah, and what stage you are in your life and what kinds of things matter to you the most.
Right, and what's going on in your life.
Yeah. Relationships with others is definitely something that we've seen kind of down the line, whether you want to flip it and call it loneliness and its effects on mortality, or you want to talk about positive relationships with others and its effects on longevity and health outcomes beyond just longevity. Those are pretty solid.
Absolutely, impressive data. And I think, again, the thing that we haven't been that good at, even though we know that relationships are good, is building interventions that really make meaningful long-term changes in your social network, right? These things, like, it's so important. And we do see that social support interventions help, but that it's complicated, right? It's complicated, and but I think there's a lot of promise to these kinds of ideas.
And we certainly see this with so many different patient populations, support groups. People love them and they are helpful. And we always joke about this in psychotherapy. Is it really the techniques that we're teaching people? Like, is it really the CBT that we're teaching, or is it the fact that we're all together and, we're practicing together, whether we're practicing meditation together, whether we're learning new skills together, whether we're sharing our emotions, all of these things make a huge difference in our health.
Yeah, and it raises the really interesting question of, everyone wants to move CBT to these online kinds of interventions, and will that have the same benefit if you're not in the same room with someone, having that sort of shared social connection in the moment? Is it enough to be together online, or do you have to be together? And there's so many interesting questions to look at. But I think the relationship piece is, I think that's a huge part of the positive emotion piece as well. When I have a big slide about how positive emotions help health, relationships are right there, and I don't think you can disentangle it. It's how can you pull those apart? It's so hard to be happy in life and to have happiness in the moment without sharing that with someone else and having good relationships and things like that.
It's so true. Sharing both your joys and your burdens, sharing both. Well, Sarah, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It's a great day.
Yeah, thank you. And hope you guys enjoyed it, and tune in next time.